The sun blazed high over the dusty plains of Texas, casting long shadows across the town of Llano as Bethany Barrett staggered through the back door of her family's homestead, clutching her arm where the iron still seared her flesh. Blood trickled between her fingers, and tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face, but she refused to make a sound, refused to give Cordelia the satisfaction of hearing her scream again. The smell of burning flesh had become all too familiar in the 3 years since her father's death, but this was the first time her stepmother had gone so far as to brand her like cattle. Bethany had just turned 18 last week, and perhaps that was what had finally pushed Cordelia over the edge. The woman had always despised her husband's daughter, but the hatred had grown to new heights when Richard Barrett died of fever, leaving the homestead to Bethany's care once she came of age. In Cordelia's mind, Bethany's very existence was an insult, a reminder that Richard had loved another woman first. "You'll never be free of me, girl," Cordelia had hissed as she pressed the red-hot iron into Bethany's skin. "Even when you think you're gone, you'll carry my mark forever." Now, crouched by the creek behind their property, Bethany dabbed cold water on her wound, a crude C branded just below her shoulder blade. The water stung, but she welcomed the pain. It helped her focus, helped her remember that she would be leaving tonight. She had been planning her escape for months, saving every penny she could hide from Cordelia's greedy fingers, and tonight was the night. She would flee west, farther into the frontier where her stepmother would never find her. "I reckon that needs more than creek water," a deep voice said from behind her. Bethany whirled around, yanking her torn blouse back over her shoulder. Standing at the edge of the trees was a man she'd seen in town once or twice, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and piercing blue eyes. Owen Adler, the local ranch hand who had recently bought his own small spread just outside of town. "Mr. Adler," she stammered, her hand instinctively covering her wounded shoulder. "I was just being burned with hot iron, looks like," he said quietly, his jaw tight with controlled anger. He took a step closer, then stopped, seeming to realize he might be frightening her. "I'm sorry, Miss Barrett. I was tracking a stray heifer when I heard," he broke off, his eyes darkening. "Did your stepmother do that to you?" Bethany turned away. "It's nothing. Nothing doesn't bleed like that." His voice was softer now, almost gentle despite its roughness. "My cabin's just over the ridge. I've got clean bandages and salve there." "I can't," she whispered. "I'm leaving tonight if Cordelia catches me talking to you." Owen's expression hardened, his hand moving unconsciously to the revolver at his hip. "She won't catch you. And she won't ever touch you again. I'll make sure of that." He extended his hand. "Please, that burn needs tending or it'll fester." Bethany hesitated, studying him. She knew little about Owen Adler except that he'd arrived in Llano last year after selling his share of a cattle business in Kansas. He kept to himself mostly, but folks in town spoke well of him. He had kind eyes, she realized, the kind that looked at a person, not through them. "All right," she finally said, letting him help her to her feet. "But just for the medicine, then I need to go." "Where?" he asked, leading her toward a path through the trees. Bethany shook her head. "Anywhere but here." Owen's cabin was small but well built, the interior neat and sparse in the way of a man who kept only what he needed. He gestured for her to sit at the rough-hewn table while he gathered supplies. A basin of clean water, bandages, and a jar of pungent salve that smelled of herbs and honey. "This might sting," he warned, dipping a cloth into the water, "but I promise it helps." Bethany turned slightly in the chair, letting her torn blouse slip just enough to expose the burn. She flinched when the wet cloth touched her skin, but bit her lip to keep from crying out. "My pa was an army surgeon," Owen explained as he worked. "Taught me a thing or two about treating wounds. Said more men died of infection than bullets in the war." His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands so large and calloused. As he cleaned the burn, Bethany found herself relaxing slightly, the cool cloth soothing against her inflamed skin. "What did she use?" Owen asked, his voice carefully neutral though she could hear the anger simmering beneath. Branding iron. From the barn, his hands paused momentarily. Why? The single word carried weight, like he already knew the answer would be insufficient no matter what it was. She says I stole from her. A brooch that belonged to my mother. Bethany swallowed hard. I did take it, but it wasn't hers to keep. My father meant for me to have it. Owen resumed his ministrations, carefully applying the salve before covering the wound with a clean bandage. No reason on God's green earth justifies this, Miss Barrett. Bethany, she corrected quietly. If you're doctoring me, you might as well use my given name. A small smile touched his lips. Bethany then, and I'm Owen. He tied off the bandage and stepped back, giving her space. Are you hungry? She started to deny it, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. Owen chuckled and moved to the small stove, where he set about preparing a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and biscuits. The food was plain but filling, and Bethany realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a full meal. Cordelia had taken to rationing her food, claiming she didn't deserve to eat what she hadn't worked for. As they ate, Owen didn't press her with questions, but when she'd finished, he leaned back in his chair and regarded her thoughtfully. I don't mean to meddle in your affairs, but I can't in good conscience send you off alone with nothing but the clothes on your back, he said. I have a proposition for you. Bethany tensed. She'd heard propositions before from men in town whose eyes lingered too long on her form, but Owen's expression held no such intent. I've been meaning to hire help at the ranch, he continued. I've got 30 head of cattle now, and I'm aiming to expand. There's a second cabin on my property. It needs work, but it's solid. You could stay there, help around the place, earn a proper wage. He held up a hand when she started to protest. It would be strictly business. You'd have your privacy, and I wouldn't expect anything improper. Bethany stared at him, searching for deceit and finding none. Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me. Owen's blue eyes met her steadily. I know enough. I know you're brave enough to endure what no person should suffer. I know you're planning to flee into unknown territory with winter coming on. And I know that if I don't offer you a safe place, I'll spend the rest of my days wondering if I could have prevented whatever befalls you out there. He gestured to the window where the vast Texas landscape stretched into the distance. The frontier's no place for a woman alone, Bethany. And your ranch is safer, she challenged, though there was no heat in her words. His smile was grim. Cordelia Barrett won't set foot on my property, I can promise you that. Bethany considered his offer. She had planned to head to San Antonio, maybe find work as a seamstress or cook, but she had no connections there, no guarantee of employment. Owen's offer would give her shelter, income, and time to plan her next steps more carefully. I can cook, she said finally, and I know horses. I can mend clothes and tend gardens. Then we have a deal. Owen extended his hand across the table, and after a moment's hesitation, Bethany shook it. His palm was warm and rough against hers, the grip firm but not crushing. I'll need to get my things, she said. What little I have, Owen nodded. We'll go after nightfall. Your stepmother will be asleep by then, I reckon. True to his word, Owen escorted Bethany back to the Barrett homestead just after midnight. The house was dark, and they moved silently around to the back, where Bethany slipped in through her window. It took her only minutes to gather her meager belongings. A change of clothes, her mother's hairbrush, the disputed brooch she'd hidden beneath a loose floorboard, and a small, worn Bible that had been her father's. When she emerged, Owen was waiting with his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding who stood patiently as they mounted together. Bethany sat behind Owen, holding her small bundle with one hand and his waist with the other. She felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration as they rode away from the only home she'd ever known, terror at the uncertainty of her future, exhilaration at the knowledge that she would never again feel Cordelia's cruelty. The ride to Owen's ranch took less than an hour. The main house came into view, first larger than his cabin in town, though still modest. Beyond it was a barn, corral, and, set slightly apart, a smaller cabin that Bethany assumed would be hers. It's not much, Owen said as he helped her down from the horse. But it's yours for as long as you want it. In the moonlight, Bethany could see that the second cabin was indeed in need of repair. The porch sagged slightly, and one window was covered with canvas rather than glass. But it was clean inside with a small stove, a narrow bed, a table, and a chair. "I'll fix the window tomorrow," Owen promised, lighting a lamp for her. "And there's firewood stacked outside. Will you be comfortable enough for tonight?" Bethany looked around the small space and felt tears prick her eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered. Owen shifted awkwardly, seeming unsure how to respond to her emotion. "Well then, I'll leave you to rest. We can talk more about your duties tomorrow." He paused at the door. "Lock this behind me. Not that you need to worry here, but it might help you sleep better." After he'd gone, Bethany did as he suggested, sliding the bolt home with a satisfying click. Then she sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. Her shoulder throbbed beneath the bandage, but the salve had numbed the worst of the pain. For the first time in 3 years, she felt a flicker of hope, a dangerous, fragile thing that she scarcely dared acknowledge. She knew little about Owen Adler, but he had shown her more kindness in one day than she'd experienced since her father's death. Whether that kindness would last remained to be seen, but for tonight, at least, she was safe. Bethany awoke to sunlight streaming through the canvas-covered window and the distant sounds of ranch life. Cattle lowing, a hammer striking metal, a horse nickering. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was back in her room at the Barrett homestead, and Cordelia would soon be screaming for her to start her chores. Then the pain in her shoulder reminded her of yesterday's events, and she sat up, looking around the small cabin with new eyes. In daylight, she could see that the cabin, though simple, had been prepared with care. The floors were swept clean, the stove was stocked with wood, and a pitcher of water sat on the small table beside a basin. Someone, Owen, presumably had left a basket on the table as well, covered with a cloth. Inside, Bethany found fresh bread, a jar of preserves, and a small block of cheese. She ate hungrily, then used some of the water to wash her face and hands. Her dress from yesterday was torn and stained with blood, so she changed into her only other outfit, a faded blue cotton dress that had once been her mother's. It hung loose on her frame. Years of Cordelia's discipline had left her thinner than she should be. Outside, the October morning was crisp but sunny. Bethany took a moment to survey Owen's ranch properly. It was smaller than some in the area, but well-maintained. The main house was a substantial log structure, the barn nearly as large beside it. A corral held several horses, and beyond, she could see cattle grazing on the rolling plains. To the west, hills rose in the distance, covered with scrub and the occasional stand of oak trees. She found Owen by the barn, repairing a section of fence. He looked up as she approached, his expression warming. "You slept well, I hope?" he asked, setting down his hammer. "Better than I have in years," Bethany admitted. "Thank you for the food." Owen nodded, seeming pleased. "You're welcome. How's the shoulder?" "It hurts, but it's bearable." "We should change the bandage later," he said. "But for now, would you like a tour of the place, so you know what you're getting into?" The tour was comprehensive. Owen showed her the barn with its 6 stalls, the smokehouse, the chicken coop with a dozen laying hens, the vegetable garden now mostly harvested for winter, and the small orchard of apple and peach trees. He introduced her to his horses, the buckskin gelding, Buck, and a pretty bay mare named Sadie, and pointed out the boundaries of his property, which stretched for nearly 500 acres. "It's a lot for one man," he acknowledged as they walked back toward the houses. "That's why I've been meaning to hire help. The previous owner, Old Man Willoughby, had 3 sons working the place with him. When they all moved on to California, he decided to sell." "How long have you been here?" Bethany asked. "Just over a year. Bought it last September." Owen glanced at her. "I was in the cattle business in Kansas before that, but I wanted my own spread. Texas seemed like the place to build something." He paused, then added more quietly, "Something lasting." There was a story there, Bethany sensed, but didn't press. Everyone had their secrets, their pasts they preferred not to discuss. She certainly had hers. Now, about your duties, Owen continued, all business again. I can handle the cattle and most of the heavy work, but I could use help with the cooking, the garden, the chickens, and such. And if you're comfortable with horses, as you said, they could use regular exercising and grooming. I can manage all that, Bethany assured him. I ran the Barrett household after my father died, though Cordelia took the credit. Owen's expression darkened at the mention of her stepmother. Did she? He gestured vaguely toward Bethany's shoulder. Has she done that before? Bethany hesitated, then turned slightly, showing him the faint scar that curved along her jawline. This was a hot poker 2 years ago when I dropped her favorite teacup. There are others. She was creative. Owen's hands clenched at his sides, his jaw tightening. She belongs in jail. The sheriff is her cousin, Bethany said with a bitter smile. He'd never believe me over her. Besides, I'm away now, that's what matters. Owen looked like he wanted to argue, but instead nodded stiffly. Right then. Let's focus on getting you settled. He cleared his throat. About payment, I can offer room and board plus $5 a week. It's not much, but it's more than fair, Bethany interrupted, astonished. $5 a week was more than many men earned, let alone women. But it's too much for just household chores and garden work. It's what the work is worth to me, Owen said firmly. I've been living on my own cooking for too long, and the garden's been half neglected. As for the horses, a good ranch hand would charge twice that. He held up a hand when she started to protest again. We can revisit the arrangement in a month if you still think it's unfair. Bethany decided not to argue further. The truth was, she needed the money if she ever hoped to establish herself independently. Very well. When would you like me to start? No rush, Owen said. Your shoulder needs healing first, but if you're feeling up to it, I wouldn't say no to a meal that doesn't involve burnt beans tonight. Bethany found herself smiling, really smiling for the first time in what felt like years. I think I can manage that. The first week at the ranch passed in a blur of activity as Bethany settled into her new role. Despite Owen's insistence that she take time to heal, she threw herself into the work, finding solace in the routine of chores. She cooked 3 meals a day, tended the chickens, mended clothes, and began preparing the garden for spring planting. When her shoulder permitted, she also helped with the horses, discovering that the bay mare, Sadie, had a particular fondness for her. Owen was a quiet employer, often gone for long hours tending to the cattle or riding the perimeter of his property. But he was unfailingly polite when they did interact, thanking her for meals and asking after her comfort. In the evenings, they would sometimes sit on the porch of the main house, Owen smoking his pipe while Bethany mended or knitted, their conversation gradually becoming more comfortable. She learned that he was 30 years old, had fought briefly in the latter part of the Civil War as a Union soldier, and had wandered west afterward, working various jobs before settling into the cattle business. He had a younger sister in St. Louis, married to a banker, and parents who had died within a year of each other when he was in his early 20s. What about you? He asked one evening, about 10 days after her arrival. You mentioned your father, but what about your mother? Bethany's hands stilled on the shirt she was mending. She died when I was 7, childbed fever, the baby my brother didn't survive either. She swallowed hard. My father remarried 2 years later. Cordelia was from Austin, visiting relatives in Llano. She seemed kind at first. They often do, Owen murmured, his expression sympathetic. When did that change after they married? Little things at first, sharp words, small punishments for imagined slights. It got worse after my father died. Bethany resumed her stitching, finding comfort in the repetitive motion. I was 15 then. Cordelia always resented that my father left the homestead to me to inherit when I turned 18. She did everything she could to make me leave before that happened. But you stayed, Bethany nodded. It was my home, and where would I have gone? An unmarried girl with no family. She didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew the limited options available to such women on the frontier. "And now," Owen asked softly, "what do you want, Bethany? Beyond safety, I mean." The question took her by surprise. No one had asked what she wanted in so long that she had almost forgotten how to want anything beyond survival. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "For years, all I could think about was getting away from Cordelia. I never let myself plan much beyond that." She thought for a moment. "I suppose I'd like a place of my own someday. A small house, maybe, and I'd like to learn to read better. My father taught me some, but Cordelia burned my books after he died." Owen's expression darkened at this new revelation of cruelty, but he kept his voice even. "I have books. Not many, but you're welcome to them." He gestured toward the cabin. "And as for a place of your own, you'll have money saved soon enough." Bethany smiled gratefully. "Thank you for all of this." She gestured around them, encompassing the ranch, the safety it provided. Owen shook his head. "You're earning your keep. No need to thank me for that." But they both knew his kindness extended far beyond an employment arrangement. He had risked Cordelia's wrath by helping Bethany escape, had opened his home to a virtual stranger, and had treated her with a respect few women in her position could expect. As they sat in companionable silence, watching the sun set over the western hills, Bethany felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, not just gratitude, but a warmth that made her glance at Owen's profile more often than necessary, noting the strong line of his jaw and the way the fading light brought out copper highlights in his brown hair. She quickly looked away when he turned toward her, not wanting him to catch her staring. But as they bid each other good night and she returned to her cabin, Bethany found herself wondering what it might be like if their relationship were something other than employer and employee. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. After Cordelia, she had sworn never to be dependent on another person again. Yet Owen Adler seemed different from anyone she had ever known, solid and reliable as the hills themselves, with a quiet strength that demanded nothing in return. The first frost came in early November, painting the grass silver in the mornings and bringing a biting chill to the air. Bethany's shoulder was healing well, the brand now a raised, pink scar rather than an angry wound. Owen had made good on his promise to repair her cabin, replacing the canvas window with real glass and fixing the sagging porch. He'd even brought her a small bookshelf, filled with volumes from his own collection. "I figured you might want something to do on the cold evenings," he'd said gruffly, seeming almost embarrassed by the gesture. Bethany had been deeply touched, running her fingers over the spines of books she'd never read. Shakespeare's plays, Dickens' novels, volumes of poetry by Wordsworth and Tennyson. There were practical books as well, a medical guide, a botany text, even a cookbook with recipes far more elaborate than anything she'd attempted. "This is too generous," she'd protested. "These must be precious to you," Owen had shrugged. "Books are meant to be read, not hoarded." "My father believed that strongly. Besides," he'd added with a small smile, "I've read them all already." Now, as winter settled over the ranch, their evening routine expanded to include reading sessions, with Owen sometimes explaining passages Bethany found difficult, or discussing the stories with her. She discovered she had a particular fondness for poetry, while Owen preferred historical accounts and adventure tales. These quiet evenings became the highlight of Bethany's days. She found herself watching the sun's progress across the sky, anticipating the moment when chores would be done, and they could retire to the warmth of Owen's sitting room, where a fire crackled in the hearth and the world beyond seemed distant and unimportant. One such evening, just before Thanksgiving, they were discussing Romeo and Juliet when Owen abruptly changed the subject. "I need to ride into town tomorrow," he said, closing the book. "We're low on supplies and I want to check on cattle prices at the exchange." Bethany tensed. She hadn't been to Lano since her escape, fearing an encounter with Cordelia. "I see." Owen studied her face. "Would you like to come along? I thought you might want to purchase some fabric, maybe, for new dresses." His eyes briefly took in her faded blue dress, still one of only two she owned despite having money now to buy more. "I can't," Bethany said quietly. "Cordelia won't touch you," Owen finished firmly. "Not with me there. Besides, it's time the town saw you as a free woman, not a runaway." Bethany considered his words. He was right in a way. Hiding forever would only give Cordelia power over her, and she did desperately need new clothes. "All right," she decided. "I'll come." The next morning dawned clear and cold. Owen hitched the wagon while Bethany prepared a basket of food for their journey: bread, cheese, and apples for the hour-long ride. She dressed in her blue dress, now neatly mended and cleaned, and wrapped herself in the warm shawl Owen had purchased for her from a traveling peddler last month. As they set off down the rutted road toward town, Bethany's anxiety grew. What if Cordelia saw her? What if she tried to force her to return to the homestead? Legally, Bethany owned the property now that she was 18, but she had fled without asserting her claim, and Cordelia had powerful connections in town. Owen seemed to sense her unease. "We'll stay together," he promised. "And I've asked my friend Marshall, he owns the general store, to have the papers ready." "Papers?" Bethany asked, confused. "For your inheritance. The deed to your father's property. Marshall's brother is a lawyer in Austin. He's drawn up the documents you'll need to claim what's rightfully yours." Bethany stared at him, stunned. "You did that? For me?" Owen kept his eyes on the road, but she could see color rising in his cheeks. "It's only right. The land is yours. You shouldn't have to hide from what belongs to you." Gratitude and another, stronger emotion welled up in Bethany's chest. She wanted to thank him, but words seemed inadequate for the magnitude of what he was doing for her. Instead, she reached out impulsively and squeezed his hand where it rested on his thigh. Owen looked startled at the contact, then gave her a small, warm smile that made her heart flutter strangely. He turned his hand over, capturing hers briefly before returning his attention to the horses. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a comfortable one, filled with unspoken understanding. By the time the town of Lano came into view, Bethany felt calmer, bolstered by Owen's presence beside her. The town had grown since the end of the war, now boasting a proper main street with several businesses, including Marshall's general store, a small bank, a saloon, and a newly built schoolhouse. Owen guided the wagon to a hitching post outside the store, then came around to help Bethany down. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. Bethany took a deep breath and nodded, placing her hand on his sleeve. Together they entered the store, where a bell above the door announced their arrival. Marshall Hicks, a portly man with a genial smile, greeted them warmly. "Owen, good to see you, friend." "And this must be Miss Barrett," he bowed slightly. "Marshall Hicks, at your service, madam. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Hicks," Bethany replied, relaxing slightly at his friendly manner. "I have those papers we discussed," Marshall said to Owen, lowering his voice, "in my office out back. And you should know that Mrs. Barrett, the elder Mrs. Barrett, that is, was in earlier, seemed in quite a state about something." Bethany's grip on Owen's arm tightened and he covered her hand with his own. "Is she still in town?" he asked. "Haven't seen her leave," Marshall confirmed. "Look, why don't you two come to the back? We can discuss the papers there, away from prying eyes." They followed Marshall through the store to a small office cluttered with ledgers and invoices. On the desk lay several official-looking documents. "These establish Miss Barrett's claim to the homestead," Marshall explained. "My brother says all she needs to do is sign them, have them witnessed, which I'm happy to do, and then file them with the county office in Austin. After that, the property is legally and indisputably hers." Bethany approached the desk hesitantly, scanning the documents. The legal language was confusing, but she could make out references to her father's will and her status as his sole heir. "And once I sign these, what happens?" she asked. "You own the land," Marshall said simply. "You can sell it, rent it, or move back there yourself. Whatever you choose." Bethany looked at Owen, who had remained by the door. "What do you think I should do?" His expression was carefully neutral. It's your decision, Bethany, but having options is never a bad thing. She nodded slowly, then turned back to Marshall. I'd like to read them first, if that's all right. Of course, Marshall said, pushing the papers toward her. Take your time. Bethany read through the documents carefully, asking questions when she encountered terms she didn't understand. Both men answered patiently, never rushing her or making her feel ignorant for asking. Finally, satisfied that she understood what she was signing, Bethany picked up the pen Marshall offered. This doesn't mean I'm leaving the ranch, she said to Owen as she signed her name on the first document. I'm happy there, but you're right, I should claim what's mine. Relief flickered across Owen's face so quickly she almost missed it. You have a home with me for as long as you want it, he said quietly. Marshall witnessed each signature, then sealed the documents in an envelope. I'll have these sent to Austin with the next mail coach. Should be processed within a fortnight. He hesitated, then added, You might want to be careful leaving town today. Like I said, Cordelia Barrett was in quite a state. As if summoned by her name, the shop bell jingled and a shrill voice rang out from the front of the store. Marshall Hicks. I know you're hiding that ungrateful girl back there. Come out this instant, Bethany Barrett. Bethany froze, her blood turning to ice at the sound of her stepmother's voice. Owen immediately moved to her side, his expression hardening. Stay here, Marshall urged them, heading for the door. I'll handle this. But before he could reach it, the door burst open, revealing Cordelia Barrett in all her fury. She was a tall, angular woman with sharp features and cold eyes, dressed in a black gown that made her pale skin appear almost ghostly. When she spotted Bethany, her thin lips curved into a cruel smile. There you are, you little thief, she hissed. Did you think you could just run away, take what's mine? Owen stepped in front of Bethany protectively. Mrs. Barrett, I suggest you leave. Now. Cordelia's gaze flicked to him dismissively. This doesn't concern you, Adler. The girl is my responsibility and she's coming home with me. No, she's not, Owen said, his voice dangerously quiet. Bethany is 18 years old and free to make her own choices. And she's chosen not to live with a woman who brands children for amusement. Cordelia's face contorted with rage. You dare. I dare a lot of things, madam, Owen interrupted. Including making sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of monster you are, he gestured to Bethany. Show her. After a moment's hesitation, Bethany turned slightly and pulled her shawl aside, revealing the top of the brand scar visible above her dress collar. Marshall gasped in horror. Dear God, Cordelia, he breathed. You did that to her. She deserved worse, Cordelia spat. Ungrateful, lying, that's enough, Owen said sharply. He nodded toward the documents on the desk. Bethany has just signed papers claiming her legal inheritance. The homestead is hers now, as her father intended. Impossible, Cordelia's face had gone even paler. Richard left it to me. He left it to Bethany to inherit when she turned 18, Marshall confirmed, finding his voice. You were to act as caretaker until then. Those were the terms of his will, which my brother reviewed thoroughly. Cordelia's eyes darted between them, calculation replacing rage. Very well, she said after a moment, her voice suddenly calm. The girl can have the worthless patch of dirt, but everything in it is mine, the furniture, the livestock, everything Richard and I acquired during our marriage. Actually, Marshall interjected, the will specifies that the property and all its contents pass to Bethany. The only exceptions are your personal items and the money you brought to the marriage. Cordelia's composure cracked. This is robbery, she shrieked. You'll regret this, all of you. Especially you, she added, glaring at Bethany with naked hatred. You think you're free of me, you'll never be free, my mark will be with you forever, girl. Get out, Owen said, taking a step toward her, before I forget that you're a woman. For a moment, it seemed Cordelia might continue her tirade, but something in Owen's expression must have warned her against it. With a final venomous look at Bethany, she swept from the room. In the silence that followed, Bethany found herself trembling violently. Owen was at her side immediately, guiding her to a chair. "It's all right," he murmured. "She's gone. She can't hurt you anymore." "I'll get some brandy," Marshall offered, rummaging in a drawer. Bethany shook her head. "No, I'm fine, She took a shuddering breath. "I didn't expect to see her today." Owen knelt beside her chair, his blue eyes searching her face with concern. "We can leave right away if you want. Come back for supplies another day." "No," Bethany said, straightening her spine. "No, I won't let her chase me away. We came to town for a reason, and I still need that fabric." A slow smile spread across Owen's face, a smile of pride and something warmer that made Bethany's heart skip. "That's my brave girl," he said softly, then seemed to catch himself. "I mean, it's all right," Bethany interrupted, a blush heating her cheeks. "I know what you meant." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Marshall cleared his throat awkwardly, reminding them of his presence. "Well then," he said briskly. "Let's get back to business, shall we? I just got in some lovely new calicos that might interest you, Miss Barrett." The rest of their visit to town passed without incident. There was no sign of Cordelia as they completed their shopping, though Bethany felt eyes on her as they moved between businesses. News of the confrontation at Marshall's store had spread quickly, it seemed, and the townspeople were curious about the girl who had defied her stepmother and laid claim to her inheritance. Some, like the baker's wife, were openly sympathetic, pressing extra rolls into Bethany's hands and whispering that she'd always thought there was something not right about Cordelia Barrett. Others were more reserved, watching from windows or doorways with inscrutable expressions. Owen remained protectively close throughout, his hand occasionally coming to rest at the small of Bethany's back as they navigated the crowded general store or crossed the muddy street. Each touch sent a jolt of awareness through her, a feeling both unsettling and exhilarating. By the time they headed back to the ranch, the wagon was loaded with supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, and salt, nails and tools for winter repairs, warm blankets for the coming cold months, and several lengths of fabric for Bethany, practical cotton for everyday dresses, and a length of soft blue wool that Owen had insisted on purchasing for her as a Christmas present. "It matches your eyes," he'd said quietly, holding the fabric against her cheek in Marshall's store. The simple, honest compliment had warmed Bethany more than any elaborate flattery could have. As they left town behind, the tension gradually eased from Bethany's shoulders. The confrontation with Cordelia had been terrifying but also cathartic. For the first time, she had stood her ground against her tormentor, had claimed what was rightfully hers. "How do you feel?" Owen asked as the ranch came into view. Bethany considered the question. "Stronger," she said finally. "Like I've taken back a piece of myself that she stole." She glanced at him. "Thank you for standing with me." Owen's gaze remained on the road ahead, but his expression softened. "Always," he said simply. The word hung between them, weighted with promise. Bethany looked away, afraid that if she met his eyes now, he would see too much in hers, the growing feelings she scarcely dared acknowledge, even to herself. Instead, she watched the ranch draw closer, the place that had become her true home in ways the Barrett homestead never had. And as the wagon rattled over the final stretch of road, she realized something that brought both peace and a flutter of anticipation. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Winter deepened, bringing short days and long nights to the Texas hill country. December arrived with a rare snowfall that delighted Bethany, who had always loved the transformative magic of snow. She spent an entire morning standing on the porch of her cabin, watching fat flakes swirl and settle on the ground, until Owen teased her for catching her death of cold just to gawk at frozen water. "It's beautiful," she'd protested, laughing as he draped another blanket around her shoulders. "Look how it makes everything new again." Owen had paused then, looking not at the snow but at her face flushed with cold and alight with joy. "Yes," he'd said softly, "beautiful." The moment had hung between them, fragile as a snowflake, before Owen cleared his throat and mumbled something about checking on the cattle. He'd retreated quickly, leaving Bethany with a fluttering heart and the distinct impression that they had been talking about entirely different things. Such moments had become more frequent as winter progressed, a lingering touch when passing the salt at dinner, a shared look over a passage in a book, the way Owen's eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't aware. Bethany wasn't naive. She recognized the signs of attraction, had seen them before in the gazes of young men in town. But this was different, deeper, more measured, weighted with respect rather than mere desire. What she couldn't quite determine was how she felt in return. Her experiences with Cordelia had left her wary of dependency, of giving anyone power over her life or heart. Yet she couldn't deny the warmth that suffused her whenever Owen was near, the way she found herself watching for him from her cabin window, the disappointment she felt on days when ranch work kept him too busy for their evening reading sessions. As Christmas approached, Bethany channeled her confused emotions into preparing for the holiday. She hadn't celebrated properly since her father died. Cordelia had deemed it a frivolous waste, and she was determined to make this Christmas special. She baked cookies and pies, made garlands from pine boughs and red berries, and even crafted small gifts for Owen. Knitted gloves, a new shirt she'd sewn from sturdy cotton, and a bookmark embroidered with his initials. Owen, for his part, disappeared into town one day and returned with mysterious packages that he refused to let her see. "Christmas surprises," he'd said with a wink that made her stomach flip oddly. On Christmas Eve, they shared a feast that Bethany had spent days preparing. Roast chicken, one of their own hens, selected for the honor, cornbread stuffing, mashed potatoes, gravy, green beans preserved from summer's harvest, and an apple pie still bubbling from the oven. Owen had contributed a bottle of wine, a luxury he'd purchased in town specifically for the occasion. "This is amazing," he declared after the first bite, looking around at the transformed sitting room. Bethany had moved their meal from the kitchen to the more formal space, decorating the rarely used dining table with pine cones, candles, and her best embroidered cloth. "I can't remember the last time I had a proper Christmas dinner." "Not since before the war," Bethany guessed, pleased by his reaction. "When you were with your family," Owen nodded, his expression growing distant. "Christmas of '60, before everything changed." He took a sip of wine. "My mother always made sure the house was decorated just so. My sister and I would help, though I suspect we created more work than we saved." "You must miss them," Bethany said softly. "Every day." Owen's gaze returned to her, warming. "But this feels like family again. Thank you for that." The simple sincerity of his words touched Bethany deeply. "It feels that way to me too," she admitted, then added hastily. "Though I know I'm just your employee." "No," Owen interrupted, reaching across the table to touch her hand. "You're not just anything, Bethany, you're—" He hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. "You're important to me, very important." Bethany's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "Owen," a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, breaking the moment. Owen withdrew his hand, clearing his throat. "Sounds like we might be in for a storm," he said, rising to look outside. "Snow's picking up again." Grateful for the distraction, Bethany began gathering their empty plates. "I should head back to my cabin before it gets worse then." "No," Owen said quickly, turning from the window. "I mean, it's already bad out there. Drifts are forming. You should stay here tonight." At her startled expression, he added hastily, "In the guest room, of course. It's all made up. I wouldn't want you getting lost between the houses in a blizzard." Bethany hesitated, then nodded. The thought of crossing the yard in a snowstorm was unappealing, and there was nothing improper about staying in Owen's guest room, especially in such circumstances. "All right, thank you." They cleaned up together, working in companionable silence. Afterward, Owen built up the fire in the sitting room and suggested they exchange gifts. "Tonight?" Bethany asked, surprised. "I thought the tradition was Christmas morning." Owen smiled. "Some families do it on Christmas Eve. Mine always did." "Besides," he added with a boyish eagerness that made him look years younger, I don't think I can wait until morning. Laughing, Bethany agreed. They retrieved their gifts, Bethany's from her basket in the kitchen, Owen's from a cupboard he usually kept locked and settled before the fire. Ladies first, Owen insisted, handing her a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with red string. Inside was the blue wool fabric they'd purchased in town, but it had been transformed into a beautiful winter cloak, lined with soft flannel and fastened with silver clasps. Bethany gasped, running her fingers over the fine stitching. Owen, this is exquisite, but how? Mrs. Hicks Marshall's wife is quite the seamstress, Owen explained, looking pleased with her reaction. I asked her to make it up for you. Do you like it? Like it? It's the most beautiful thing I've ever owned. Bethany stood and swirled it around her shoulders, delighting in the weight and warmth of it, but it must have been so expensive. Owen waved away her concern. You needed a proper winter coat. That old shawl isn't enough for Texas winters. He patted the space beside him on the sofa. There's more. The second package contained a pair of soft leather gloves lined with rabbit fur, and the third held a book, a collection of poetry by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. No relation to you, I assume, Owen teased, though the name caught my eye. They're all perfect, Bethany said, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of his gifts. I don't know how to thank you. Seeing you smile is thanks enough, Owen replied, then looked embarrassed at his own sentiment. Now, what's this? He added quickly, picking up one of the packages she had brought. Bethany watched anxiously as he unwrapped her gifts, which seemed so modest compared to his. But Owen appeared genuinely delighted with each one, immediately pulling on the knitted gloves and declaring them just right, admiring the craftsmanship of the shirt, and running his thumb over the embroidered bookmark with evident appreciation. No one's made something for me with their own hands since my mother, he said quietly. These mean more to me than you know, Bethany. The intimacy of the moment, the fire crackling beside them, the howl of the wind outside emphasizing their sheltered togetherness, it all combined to create a sense of rightness, of belonging that Bethany had never experienced before. When Owen's arm settled hesitantly around her shoulders, she leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. She could hear the steady thump of his heart, feel the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. Bethany, he murmured, his voice rumbling beneath her ear. I need to tell you something. She looked up at him, struck by the seriousness in his expression. What is it? Owen took a deep breath. I've been thinking about this for weeks, trying to find the right moment, the right words. He shifted slightly, turning to face her more fully. The thing is, I care for you deeply. More than is proper for an employer toward his employee or even a friend toward a friend. Bethany's heart began to race. Owen, please let me finish before I lose my nerve, he said with a rueful smile. I know you've been through hell with that woman. I know you came here looking for safety, not entanglements, and I would never, ever want you to feel pressured or obligated in any way. He took her hand gently. But I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is anything less than what it is. Love. The word hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Bethany stared at him, speechless, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. Owen continued, his voice growing more uncertain at her silence. I don't expect anything from you. If all you want is friendship, I'll respect that completely. You'll still have a home here, a job, everything exactly as it is now. But I couldn't let another day go by without telling you the truth. Bethany found her voice at last. Why me? She asked softly. You could have any woman in the county, women without scars, without nightmares. Owen's expression softened and he reached up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. Your scars are badges of courage, Bethany. They show that you survived, that you're stronger than whatever tried to break you. His thumb brushed her jawline, tracing the faint mark left by Cordelia's poker. As for why you, because you're kind and brave and brilliant, because you fill this house with warmth I never knew was missing. Because when I'm with you, I feel like the man I always wanted to be. Tears welled in Bethany's eyes, spilling down her cheeks. Owen caught one with his thumb, looking stricken. I've upset you. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. No, Bethany interrupted, covering his hand with her own. No, they're not sad tears. She took a shaky breath. No one has ever said such things to me before. I didn't think anyone ever would. Hope flickered in Owen's eyes. Does that mean? Instead of answering with words, Bethany leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, an exploration rather than a declaration. But when Owen's arms came around her, drawing her closer with careful reverence, something inside Bethany bloomed a certainty, a rightness that dispelled her lingering doubts. When they finally parted, both breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Bethany Barrett, he whispered, and I will spend every day making sure you never doubt it. I love you too, she replied, the words feeling both strange and familiar on her tongue. I think I have for a while now. I was just afraid to admit it. Owen smiled, his joy palpable. We'll take things slowly, he promised. However you need. There's no rush. Bethany nodded gratefully, though she knew in her heart that her decision was already made. Owen Adler was nothing like Cordelia, nothing like anyone she had ever known. He didn't want to control her or break her. He wanted to stand beside her, to build something together. For the first time since her father died, Bethany felt truly safe. Not just physically secure, but emotionally anchored, seen and valued for exactly who she was. Outside, the Christmas Eve blizzard raged on, but inside, by the light of the fire, two people who had thought themselves destined for solitude discovered the gift of belonging. Spring came to the Texas Hill Country in a riot of wildflowers, bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, and Mexican hat blanketing the rolling landscape in vibrant color. With the warmer weather came changes to the ranch as well. Bethany's small cabin stood empty now. She had moved into the main house with Owen shortly after Valentine's Day, when he had formally proposed with his grandmother's ring, a simple gold band with a small pearl that suited Bethany perfectly. The wedding was planned for June, a small affair with only a few guests, Marshall and Mrs. Hicks, the local pastor and his wife, and a handful of neighboring ranchers with whom Owen had formed friendships. Owen's sister had written that she and her husband would try to make the journey from St. Louis, though they couldn't promise with a baby due around the same time. Bethany had no family to invite, a fact that sometimes brought a shadow of sadness to her eyes. She had not seen or heard from Cordelia since their confrontation in town, though rumors suggested the woman had moved to her cousin's home in Austin, bitter and increasingly isolated. The Barrett homestead stood empty, its future undecided. Bethany had considered selling it, but something held her back, not sentiment for the place itself, which held more painful memories than good ones, but a sense that she wasn't quite ready to sever that final tie to her past. There's no hurry to decide, Owen told her one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold and crimson. The land's been there for decades. It'll wait until you know what feels right. Bethany squeezed his hand gratefully. Have I told you today how much I love you? Owen pretended to consider the question. Not in the last hour, I don't think, she laughed and leaned over to kiss him. I love you, Owen Adler, more than I have words to express. I love you too, almost Mrs. Adler. His smile faded slightly, his expression growing more serious. I've been thinking about something I want to discuss with you, about the wedding. Bethany raised an eyebrow. You're not getting cold feet, are you? Never, he assured her quickly. It's about the ceremony itself. Specifically, your dress. Bethany's hand went unconsciously to her shoulder, where Cordelia's brand lay hidden beneath her clothing. She had selected a design with a high neckline and long sleeves, despite the June heat, to ensure none of her scars would be visible. What about it? She asked cautiously. Owen took both her hands in his. I want you to wear whatever makes you feel beautiful and comfortable, he began. But I also want you to know that you don't need to hide your scars from me or from anyone else. They're part of you, part of your story. Bethany looked down at their joined hands. They're ugly, she whispered, especially the brand. I don't want people staring, whispering on our wedding day. Look at me, Owen said gently. When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, "Nothing about you could ever be ugly to me. Those marks show what you survived, what you overcame. They're badges of honor, not shame." To Bethany's surprise, he slid off the porch swing and knelt before her. Slowly, with infinite tenderness, he unbuttoned the high collar of her dress, exposing the top of the brand scar. Then, holding her gaze the entire time, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to the raised flesh. "Beautiful," he murmured against her skin. "Every inch of you, and I will spend our lifetime reminding you of that if you'll let me." Tears sprang to Bethany's eyes, but they were tears of healing, of acceptance. "How did I find you?" she whispered. "How did I get so lucky?" Owen rose and sat beside her again, gathering her into his arms. "I'm the lucky one," he insisted. "And we found each other because that's how it was meant to be." In that moment, wrapped in the arms of the man who loved her completely, scars, nightmares, and all Bethany felt a peace she had thought forever beyond her reach. The past would always be part of her. The scars, both physical and emotional, would never fully fade, but they no longer defined her. What defined her now was this: love freely given and joyfully received. "I'll think about the dress," she promised, resting her head against Owen's shoulder as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the hills. "But whatever I decide, I won't be hiding anymore." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with just enough breeze to temper the June heat. Bethany stood in what had once been a guest bedroom and was now being transformed into a nursery, though they hadn't shared that news with anyone yet. The small life growing inside her was just 2 months along, their own private joy to be announced after the wedding. Mrs. Hicks fussed with Bethany's hair, arranging white flowers among the golden curls she had insisted on styling. "You look absolutely radiant, my dear," the older woman declared, stepping back to admire her work. Bethany smiled, turning to examine herself in the mirror. The dress she wore was not what anyone had expected, not Owen, not Mrs. Hicks, not even Bethany herself, until the idea had come to her in a dream 3 weeks ago. It was simple ivory cotton, with short, capped sleeves and a modest neckline that nonetheless left her collarbones and the top of her shoulders visible. The scars, the faint line along her jaw, a small circular burn on her neck, and the top edge of Cordelia's brand were all subtly visible. But what transformed the dress from simple to stunning were the embroidered wildflowers that Bethany had painstakingly added: tiny bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, and daisies that seemed to grow from the fabric itself, clustering most densely around the areas where her scars showed. She had worked on it secretly, late into the night while Owen slept, wanting to surprise him with her act of courage and acceptance. "He won't be able to take his eyes off you," Mrs. Hicks said, a hint of moisture in her own eyes. "I've never seen a more beautiful bride." A knock at the door interrupted them. Marshall's voice called, "Ladies, it's time. Everyone's assembled." Bethany took a deep breath, steadying herself. With no father to give her away, she had asked Marshall to do the honor, a request that had moved the storekeeper to uncharacteristic tears. "Ready?" Mrs. Hicks asked, adjusting the simple veil one last time. Bethany nodded. "More than ready." The ceremony was held in the garden Bethany had expanded over the spring, now lush with vegetables, herbs, and flowering plants. A small arbor had been constructed for the occasion, twined with climbing roses just beginning to bloom. Owen waited there, looking handsome and slightly nervous in a new suit, his hair neatly combed and his blue eyes bright with anticipation. When Bethany appeared on Marshall's arm, a collective murmur ran through the small gathering. Owen's expression transformed from nervous to awestruck, his gaze taking in every detail of her appearance before settling on her face with such naked adoration that Bethany felt her heart might burst. As she reached him, Owen took her hands in his thumbs brushing over her knuckles in a gesture that had become familiar and treasured. "You're breathtaking," he whispered for her ears alone. Then, noticing the embroidery and what it framed rather than concealed, his eyes widened in understanding. "Bethany, no more hiding," she whispered back. "You taught me that." The pastor cleared his throat gently, beginning the ceremony with words about love and commitment, about two lives joining to form something greater than either alone. Bethany heard it all as if from a distance, anchored to the moment only by Owen's hands holding hers, his eyes never leaving her face. When the time came for vows, Owen spoke first, his voice steady and sure. "Bethany, when you came into my life, I thought I was rescuing you. I realize now that we rescued each other. You brought light back into my world, gave me a reason to build something lasting, something good." He squeezed her hands. "I vow to honor you, to respect you, to stand beside you in all things. I vow to love you, all of you, every day, for all the days we're given. And I vow to remind you of your strength and your beauty whenever you forget." Tears blurred Bethany's vision as she began her own vows. "Owen, you saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I thought myself worthless. You taught me that scars aren't just marks of pain survived, but maps showing how far we've come." Her voice strengthened. "I vow to be your partner, your equal, your shelter in storms as you have been mine. I vow to love you honestly and completely. And I vow to remember every day the blessing that brought you into my life." The exchange of rings followed Owen's, a simple gold band, Bethany's, the pearl ring he had given her at their engagement. Then came the pastor's pronouncement, and the invitation Owen had been waiting for. "You may kiss your bride." Owen cupped Bethany's face with infinite tenderness, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks before his lips found hers in a kiss that promised everything their words had vowed. The small crowd applauded as they finally separated, both laughing through tears of joy. As they turned to face their guests, now officially husband and wife, Owen's arm settled around Bethany's waist, his hand resting protectively over the place where their child grew. The celebration that followed was simple, but joyous, a feast laid out on tables in the garden, music provided by one of the neighboring ranchers who played fiddle, dancing on the patch of grass cleared for that purpose. As evening approached, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the gathering. During a quiet moment, when Owen had been pulled away to discuss cattle prices with one of the guests, Mrs. Hicks approached Bethany with an envelope. "This came for you yesterday," she said, handing it over. "I didn't want to give it to you before the ceremony in case it was upsetting." Bethany examined the envelope, noting the Austin postmark with a flicker of apprehension. "Thank you," she said. "I'll look at it later." But curiosity got the better of her, and she slipped away to the porch to read it in private. The letter inside was brief, written in a shaky hand she recognized as Cordelia's. "Bethany, I am dying. The doctors say it's consumption, but I think it's bitterness. It has eaten me from the inside out. I will not ask your forgiveness. What I did to you was unforgivable, and we both know it. But I will tell you this: your father loved you more than life itself. And in my twisted way, I hated you for that, for having what I never did. His heart was always yours, even after he married me. You were right to take back what was yours. I hope you find happiness with it. Cordelia." Bethany reread the letter several times, unsure how to feel. There was no explicit apology, yet between the lines she sensed something like regret, or at least recognition of wrongdoing. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was something. Closure, perhaps. "Bethany," Owen's voice called from the garden. "Where'd you go, wife of mine?" She folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket, deciding to share it with Owen later. For now, this day was about beginnings, not endings, about love, not bitterness. "Here," she called back, stepping off the porch. "Just getting some air." Owen crossed to her, concern in his eyes. "Everything all right?" Bethany smiled, taking his hand and placing it once more over her stomach. "Everything is perfect, absolutely perfect," understanding dawned in Owen's eyes. "Are we going to tell them?" "I think so," Bethany decided. "It's a day for sharing joy, after all." Owen whooped, lifting her off her feet in a careful embrace before setting her down again. "Mrs. Adler, you make me the happiest man alive." His expression sobered slightly. "Are you sure you're feeling well enough? No sickness or discomfort?" "None," Bethany assured him. "I've never felt better." She touched his face. Stop worrying. This baby has the two most stubborn parents in Texas. He or she is going to be just fine, Owen laughed, pressing his forehead to hers. With your courage and my stubbornness, we're in for quite a ride, aren't we? I wouldn't have it any other way, Bethany replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him again. Then, hand in hand, they returned to their guests to share their newest joy. As the celebrations continued into the evening, Bethany found herself standing slightly apart, watching Owen talk animatedly with Marshall and some of the other men. The lantern light caught the gold of his wedding band, making it glow warmly against his tanned hand. 5 years ago, even 1 year ago, she could never have imagined this life, this happiness, this sense of safety and belonging. The journey from terrified, abused girl to confident, loved woman had been long and often painful. The scars would always remain, reminders of darker days. But as Owen had taught her, scars didn't define a person. What defined a person was how they lived with them, how they grew despite them or perhaps because of them. As if sensing her gaze, Owen looked up and smiled across the garden, a smile meant only for her. In that smile was everything Bethany had once thought beyond her reach: love, acceptance, family, home. And as she smiled back, one hand resting protectively over the new life growing within her, Bethany knew with absolute certainty that whatever the future held, whatever challenges they might face, they would face them together, two people who had found in each other not just love, but healing. Epilogue: 5 years later. Mama, look, I caught a fish. 4-year-old Richard Adler held up a small perch, his face split in a wide grin that was the image of his father's. Beside him, Owen beamed with pride, his hand steadying his son's enthusiastic display. Well done, sweetheart. Bethany called from the blanket spread under an oak tree at the edge of the creek. In her lap, 2-year-old Clara dozed, her dark curls damp with sweat in the June heat. At Bethany's feet, 6-month-old Thomas gurgled in a basket, reaching pudgy hands toward the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. It was their anniversary, and as had become their tradition, they were spending the day as a family on a picnic by the same creek where they had first met. The ranch had prospered over the years, expanding to nearly 1,000 acres with a herd of 200 cattle and a reputation for some of the finest horses in the county. The original cabin where Bethany had first stayed was now a bunkhouse for the 3 ranch hands they employed, while the main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family. Owen carefully helped Richard remove the fish from the hook, showing him how to place it in the basket they'd brought for their catch. Then, leaving his son to proudly guard their dinner, he made his way up the bank to join Bethany under the tree. "He's a natural," Owen said, settling beside his wife and dropping a kiss on her shoulder directly over the brand scar, now faded to a silvery mark. It was a gesture he had repeated countless times over the years, a silent affirmation that never failed to warm Bethany's heart. "Of course he is," Bethany replied, shifting Clara to make room for Owen. "He has the best teacher." She leaned into her husband's side, contentment washing over her. "Happy anniversary, my love." Owen's arm came around her, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her arm. 5 years. Sometimes it feels like we've been together forever, and other times it seems like just yesterday I found you here, trying to wash a wound that needed far more than creek water. Bethany smiled at the memory, no longer painful after so many years of healing. "I was so frightened that day. Of everything, but especially of trusting anyone again. And yet you trusted me enough to come to my cabin." "There was something in your eyes," Bethany said softly, "something honest. Even terrified as I was, I could see that." Owen's hand moved to cup her cheek, turning her face toward his. "I fell in love with you that very day, you know, watching you fight through pain, seeing your determination to survive. How could I not?" Bethany leaned into his touch. "It took me a bit longer," she teased. "At least a week." Owen laughed, the sound startling a nearby bird into flight. "Cruel woman, making me wait so long." Their lips met in a kiss that, even after 5 years and 3 children, still held the power to make Bethany's heart race. When they parted, Owen rested his forehead against hers, their private gesture of connection. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "A little anniversary gift." He handed her a small, flat box tied with blue ribbon. Inside, Bethany found a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When she opened it, she gasped softly. On one side was a tiny painted portrait of their children, and on the other an inscription. "For my beautiful Bethany, whose scars tell the story of her strength. All my love, Owen." Tears pricked Bethany's eyes as she looked up at her husband. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Help me put it on." Owen took the necklace and carefully fastened it around her neck, his fingers lingering on the chain. "I want you to have something to remind you always of how far you've come, how much you've overcome." Bethany touched the locket where it rested against her skin, feeling its weight light but significant, like the love that had transformed her life. "As if I could ever forget, with you reminding me every day." Down by the water, Richard called out excitedly as he caught another fish. Clara stirred in Bethany's lap, blinking sleepily before noticing her brother's excitement and squirming to be set free. Thomas continued his contented gurgling, tiny fists waving in the air. "We should probably feed these hungry monsters soon," Owen observed, watching as Clara toddled determinedly toward her brother. Small legs navigating the gentle slope with the careful concentration of the very young. Bethany nodded, but made no move to rise just yet. Instead, she leaned more firmly against Owen's solid warmth, savoring this perfect moment, her family safe and happy, the sun warm on her skin, her husband's arm strong around her shoulders. 5 years ago, she had fled from a home that was never truly hers, bearing scars that she thought would forever mark her as broken and unlovable. Now she knew better. The scars remained, some visible, some hidden deep within, but they were no longer wounds. They were reminders of a past survived, testament to a strength she hadn't known she possessed, until a man with kind blue eyes and gentle hands had helped her see it. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying all the gratitude, joy, and devotion that filled her heart. Owen's arm tightened around her, his lips pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I love you, Bethany Adler, every part of you, every day, always." Together they watched their children play in the dappled sunlight, their laughter echoing across the creek that had witnessed both their first meeting and the life they had built together, a life neither had dared to dream possible, yet one they had created nonetheless, scar by healing scar, day by loving day.